Hello everyone, welcome to my post-competition recap for SparkFun's AVC 2018. This year I just entered my featherweight crippling depression and ended up coming in first place, so that is a two-time win for AVC for me, so that was pretty nice. But as you can maybe tell from the condition of crippling depression, it was a very long and very difficult competition. So in this video, I'm going to run you through all the fights, add a little commentary, and kind of explain to you how everything went down the day of the competition. I will be doing a separate video that will be a full teardown and damage report and kind of, an analysis of what actually happened with the robot. That will be a separate video. But for right now, let's start with the very first fight. Before we get too far down into talking about all the fights, I did want to say that AVC this year, 2018, was a crazy competition and it was just brutal for everyone. There was a lot of really high-powered robots, really high-caliber robots, and there was just a lot of damage and a lot of broken robots towards the end. So it was a very challenging competition to compete in. My very first fight was against Yahoo, which is a really, really good drum spinner made by Chad New. And this fought over in China a couple times and did really well in China and is a very tough and very seasoned bot. So ultimately, my strategy with a drum is to use my disc spinner and try and get underneath that drum or try and get in those front wedgelets. If this is spinning at full speed, generally speaking, I'm kind of okay against a drum. I'm usually just going to kind of pop up in the air and hopefully I can hit something on the side, grab a wheel, something like that. However, I was having some pretty significant issues with crippling depression prior to this match. I did the full assembly the weekend before, something like that, and I noticed that the weapon was dragging a little bit. The weapon is meant to be very, very close to the ground, but when I was just kind of driving it around here out in my garage, I noticed I was scraping against the floor, which isn't good, and I also noticed that the belt tension was way too high, and none of those components really changed from this version. So that was a bit of an issue, and so the weapon was dragging, the weapon had a lot of excess friction. Let's just watch the fight and see what happened.
Crippling depression and Yahoo.
Here they go.
This is going to be a rough one.
Oh my goodness. Sparks are flying. Wow. Woo! These are some intense hits.
Yeah.
There's a lot of force. Ooh, that's a brand new scratch.
You notice that when they take a turn like that, it lifts up off the ground. That's because the rotations on the front of that are going so fast that it wants to fly.
Wow.
Wow.
I don't know if you at home can hear this through the microphones, but it sounds like a jet engine is taking off behind us right now every time that drum spins up. Wow. My goodness.
I believe that is Rob's robot.
Ah.
Oh, wow. Whoa.
That is a chunk of robot lost in the arena.
Oh, my.
The destruction, the mayhem.
The humanity. The humanity.
The robot manatee. Woo!
My. Is it rolling up again?
They are counting down. The bot is stuck. Oh, there was movement. Oh, it's trying. Oh!
Oh, wow.
That was quite the competition. I think that may have been our longest one yet.
Yep.
We're well-pitted bots. So that was, again, Crippling Depression in Yahoo.
After this first fight, I knew that I was in for a very long day. As you saw from the video, and as you can see from right here, the new version 3 or version 2 of Crippling Depression has this large titanium wedge across the back or the front, depending on which way I'm driving it. On my radio, I have an invert function which allows me to not only drive right side up, but upside down, and also forward and backwards. And because of the extra friction that I had on the weapon disc, you can see that maybe about 45 seconds in, it just kind of stopped working, which is really uncommon for Crippling Depression. That is the first time that's ever happened where the weapon disc stopped spinning. And so at that point, I didn't really know what to do. So I flipped around, drove in reverse, and was using the wedge. Also, in conjunction with all this, I was having some drive issues because this was hanging down and scraping against the floor. Usually when this is spinning, it just kind of glides on top of the floor, but when it's not spinning, it just kind of drags and I don't get as much traction on the wheels. With a drum, the wedge is the last thing you want to use. It was just kind of a last-ditch effort, and the drum caught the lip of it and just ripped it right off. This is not meant for vertical attacks. It is meant for horizontal attacks, which is the reason I made this, and so it was just a non-ideal situation. Yahoo had drive issues, so thankfully they ended up having their drive motors cut out and they were dead in the water, and I ended up getting that win. But I did have to go back to the pit and completely replace the wedge, and both of my weapon motors were shot and both of my weapon ESCs were shot. So that is something that I had to fix for the next competition, but I've never had to service the front weapon section of this robot ever, so I had to completely gut and redo that whole thing. So that was a very difficult first fight for me, having to basically go in, rebuild the wedge, and rebuild the whole weapon system after the very first fight. So let's move on to the next fight. My second fight of the day was against a robot called Bjorn Ironsides that was made by a student team out in Utah. And these guys are all a big fan of my channel, so if you guys are watching this, hello, it was nice meeting you at the competition. And because they are followers of my channel, they drew a lot of inspiration from Crippling Depression for their robot. So it had a lot of similarities, which is good and bad for me. The ultimate strategy for fighting them was just, outlive them. That's kind of always the strategy with Crippling Depression, is just go against them, go hard, and just try and outlive them. And, it worked out okay. We'll see that later on. The big difference between their robot is they had a skin of titanium all the way around. It was like this one big piece of titanium, and they also had a mid-cutter versus an undercutter. And I do apologize for not having better pictures of all these robots. I was really stressed out after losing the weapon and losing the wedge, so I completely forgot to just take pictures of everyone, but you can see a pretty good example of it in the video. So let's see how that fight went.
Lewis, you're ready. Hit the button. All right, you guys ready? Yep. All right, hit the button. Here we go! 3, 2, 1, fight! 2 minutes of bunk fest, please, somebody die. 2 Crippling pressure, can you move?
Just keep moving, don't touch it, keep moving. Keep moving. Keep moving.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I think it goes without saying this was a really unfortunate loss for me. Here's what ended up happening. After the large weapon rebuild and the wedge rebuild, I was getting everything back together, and Casey was kind of yelling at me to get back into the arena. And I forgot to do one simple thing. I forgot to tape the wires that go into the radio all together. So the wires come into the radio, and usually I tape all that so that they can't pull out. After the first couple big hits, the weapon motor wires came out, and so I didn't have a weapon anymore. And then later on, there was just one little small hit, and the rest of the wires came out, and my radio was disconnected, and I had no radio communication. It was one of those rookie mistakes that I made. I just didn't pay enough attention, and unfortunately, this was a match that I very well could have won because you saw they had let out some smoke, and they were having some issues. If my weapon was still going and my drive was still going, I would have been totally fine. But this was my first loss, and this put me down into the losers bracket, which was really unfortunate after being able to come back from that large rebuild. But yeah, let's move on to fight number 3. My third fight was up against Siegebreaker. Siegebreaker is a push bot that uses these really large magnets on the bottom, really powerful drivetrain, and a really solid frame to just push people around the arena and basically take a lot of damage from spinning weapons. This is a good and a bad robot for me to fight. It is a good robot because I'm not going to get a lot of damage from it, which is really nice. It's a bad robot because they are very powerful drive. They can push me all over the arena, and I was already having some drive issues. So let's see how that fight went down.
AVC, it's taken over.
Fight is on.
Here we go.
Ooh. These are angry sounding bots.
Yeah.
The bots out for revenge from their last battles. Ooh.
The enclosures on these are so hard that it's hard to get some vulnerable spots to hit. Sparks are flying.
Let's keep on going. These bots are pitted well against each other.
Right size. Wow. I don't know how they're going to gauge this one if it runs all 3 minutes. Oh, wow.
Now we're getting the sparks.
Yeah, that floor is getting torn up. Oh, we might have some wheels down there. Oh,
here we go.
Whoa.
That is smoke spewing.
Looks like crippling depression.
Yep.
Took it out.
We have possibly just watched the end of a bot. And there's the other one spinning in celebration.
Wow.
It's going to be a real nice smell coming at us here momentarily.
Seeing as I was already in the losers bracket, before this fight, I fully assumed I was going to be going home. They were looking pretty good, and with the issues I was having with the drive and the issues I was having with just everything else, I was really expecting them to just win on the judge's decision. Thankfully, there was a couple just lucky hits, I guess, that ended up tweaking one of their drive wheels, one of their drive motors, and they were doing the crab walk thing. They were only driving from one side, and at that point, I just kind of, danced around them and just kind of waited waited out the clock, figuring that eventually either their other drive side was going to die, or I'd maybe get a lucky hit, or it would end up going to a judge's decision. So thankfully, the other drive side ended up kind of going up in a puff of smoke. They actually blew out both of their drive ESCs, and so thankfully that was a win that I didn't suffer hardly any damage from. So that was a very lucky and very welcome win for me. So moving right along to Fight 4. Fight 4 was up against a robot called Very, Very Obvious, made by Ben of Team Panic, who is also a YouTuber. So if you want to look down below in the description, I have a link to his YouTube channel, so you can go ahead and check that out. He and I have been corresponding for a couple months about, him building a featherweight and coming to AVC. He's actually based out of Australia, so he flew a very long way to come to AVC. I knew a little bit about his robot, he knew a little bit about me, but it's always an unknown fighting someone who's never been in a competition or fought that robot in a competition before. You never know how it's going to work against you. He had a angled overhead bar spinner design, which is an interesting design and kind of very problematic for me. I wasn't confident with the wedge, I really wasn't confident with my weapon, and the drive was being a little bit weird. So I kind of had no strategy going into this. I was just kind of see how he operated, see how his weapon spun up, and then just kind of go from there. I really didn't have any strategy going into this, so let's see how the fight went.
Alright, if you're ready, hit the button. Alright, here we go. In 3, 2, 1, right.
This was another very fortunate and very lucky win for me, and a very unlucky lose for Ben. Unfortunately, the off-center design or the angle design of that weapon causes some weird gyroscopic forces, so when he gets hit or hits against me, it causes him to kind of flip around quite a bit, and at the end of his weapon he had these kind of hooks or teeth, and if you watch the slow motion, which I'll probably include right here, it just grabbed the outside edge of the arena and just pulled it right out. So unfortunately, I felt bad. I almost wanted to redo the fight because that was a really bad loss for him, but it was a very fortunate win for me and kind of re-energized and reinvigorated me that I was still in the competition, and I decided to go back to the pits, do some rebuilds, and make sure that this was working for the next fight. But yeah, it was just a really, really unfortunate, very quick turn of events for Ben. At this point in the competition, a lot of robots were receiving a lot of damage and there was a lot of forfeits. My fifth fight was against a robot called Toonami, and unfortunately for them, in their previous fight, they actually snapped off their weapon tooth and got their frame bent a little bit and had some other issues, and they decided to forfeit. They couldn't get into the arena with me. So I got a forfeit for that fight, and that moved me along. So that was a nice, easy win. I didn't have to suffer any damage. I didn't have to find anyone. That's the good news. The bad news is I had to fight against Beam. Beam is a very devastating horizontal weapon spinner. It uses a large horizontal bar that it spins in the front. It's very much like a Tombstone clone, something like that. It is a very robust, very simple, and very reliable robot. And I don't say simple in any kind of negative way. I mean that in a very good way for combat robots. The simpler, the better. I first saw Beam at Motorama last year, and he worked his way through the robots pretty quickly and did a lot of damage, and in my opinion, was the star of the show. He did really, really well. So I was both happy that he was at AVC and also maybe not so happy that he was AVC. With all the issues that I had had previously, I really wasn't that confident going into it. And he was in the loser's bracket, I was in the loser's bracket, so one of us was going home after this fight. I didn't really have a good strategy against him because it is such a devastating horizontal spinner. Usually my strategy is to try and break the weapon or stop them, but that really wasn't working out well for me during this competition, and I don't think I've ever really seen his weapon just stop like that. So that really wasn't a strategy that I could have. Also, his weapon was beyond the strength of what my wedge could handle. Seeing that Yahoo broke it right off, I really wasn't confident with this either. So my strategy going into it was to flip the robot upside down, use the disc on the top, so that would hopefully fix the drive issue with the weapon dragging. So that would give me better drive. And then I would just go full face first into him and just see who broke. This was definitely a match that the audience was waiting for. Everyone was kind of hoping that this would happen. And if you're there sitting on your couch or sitting at your computer watching this, there's probably a good portion of you that just scanned through this video to find this section of my video. So here it is, the beam and crippling depression fight. Strap in. So let's break down the fight a little bit. Initially, I was just trying to smash against him, hopefully kind of throw him off his game. Because the weight distribution is so different in Beam, you have the weapon way up front and the wheels in back. Every time we come together, he's going to kind of fly around and basically lose control. With Crippling Depression, the weight is centered right dead in the middle between the wheels, all the way at the bottom. Well, when the disc's on top, it's a little bit higher, but when I hit, I tend to just kind of spin around a little bit and I can regain control. So my goal here was to just try and hit him as much as possible, make him hit against the arena walls, things like that. Thankfully, I caught one of his wheels relatively early on, so he was kind of wobbling a little bit, and that allowed his front to come up just enough to where we went weapon to weapon. So on my weapon disc here, I'll show more of this in the damage recap, but I'm missing a pretty good chunk of my tooth here. But this is a pretty robust thing to hit against. You're not really going to shear this whole thing off. So what happened is we went tooth to tooth, and here is his insert from his tooth. He has a couple different weapon bars. He went with one that is bigger, that has impactors on it, and this is one of the impactors. They hit directly like that, and it just sheared this sucker right off. And then from then on, his weapon was actually unbalanced. And you can see it kind of vibrating after that huge hit. And so that vibration and just kind of the wear and tear of all these hits ended up causing his weapon motor to end up frying. And so it was a very, very lucky match for me, but the front got completely sheared off. You can see these huge gouges inside of here, and I had a significant amount of damage. But as you saw at the end of the match, I was still able to drive. The weapon was still operational. All this has air quotes in it. But yeah, it was a very, very difficult fight. It went a little over 2 minutes, and it was just spectacular. It's spectacular. I also shot the whole thing in 120 frames per second, so let's just enjoy some of the slow motion from the fight. I was just going to leave these clips alone when I edited this video and not really have any audio or commentary, but when I was editing I realized that it's kind of weird and creepy just to have them completely silent and alone, so here I am adding no real commentary to it. It's just really cool to see this stuff in slow motion and see the forces that are involved when so much metal that's spinning at such a high speed collides with one another. Overall, I was really happy with how composed Crippling Depression is after taking some of these big hits. It's really interesting that you can see beam is still kind of flailing around, and in many cases it's even still up in the air when Crippling Depression has all 4 tires on the ground and is even moving towards. So I was really happy with overall how the design worked in being able to recover quickly from some of these hits. This is probably one of the favorite things that I've ever filmed. It's really cool to just see the amount of kinetic energy being unleashed when these two bots come together, and just the amount of sparks and how they frame out the robot is really cool. At this point, Crippling Depression was pretty trashed. Beam really did a number on the robot. It's pretty much in the condition that you're seeing right now. Most of the panels had to be taped on afterwards. This whole, I guess, left-hand side is completely free and completely loose. So really a lot of this stuff is just being held in by the sheer fact that it has nowhere else to go. Like, this drive pod can't really come out without disassembling this whole section. And the internal frame rails here were bent completely in. I'll go into this in more detail in the damage recap video, but it was in pretty sad shape. The good news is that the electronics were all still working. I was still able to drive over to the doors at the end, as you saw, so that was nice. Everything was generally working, it's just that the whole frame was tweaked and everything was just bent up. So unfortunately that meant that I could no longer use the disc weapon because it was just coming into contact with other pieces of the frame, and it just really was kind of limping along. So we went back to the pits, did some surgery, bent all these frame rails out, taped it together, and got ready for our next fight, which was Fight 7, once again against Bjorn Ironsides. Awesome. As I said earlier, a lot of robots took a lot of damage throughout this competition, and Bjorn Ironsides was no exception. We had actually done quite a bit of damage to them, just hitting in on some of the titanium. It had shocked some things loose, and they were definitely having some issues. I was able to get this up and running again. The drive was still running okay, and the weapon was still going. I switched over to this nice big overhead bar, which you've seen throughout this video. This big overhead bar was an alternate weapon, mostly to deal with people like Huge or any kind of overhead weapon designs. Because I was using carbon fiber, I didn't really have a lot of protection on top and bottom, and I did that to shave weight so that I could end up going with the wedge. So this overhead bar design is actually a little bit larger than Beam's weapon. It's pretty good sized, and it covers a little bit of the front wedge, so when you ride up on the wedge you can make contact there, and then also it sticks out about 8 inches across the back, if we can maybe see that. So it's a pretty big coverage weapon. It also sticks out there and there. So this was the only weapon that would really work at this point. The disc kind of just wasn't working, so we decided to go with this alternate weapon and just see what was going to happen against Bjorn Ironsides for the second fight.
I hear
All
the
right.
judges calling. You can see in the right-hand corner the timer blinking.
And we're off. You can hear weapons spinning up.
Yep,
Oh,
there goes
and there
the
goes.
top.
Yep, there goes Rob's weapon. Crippling Depression's weapon straight away.
Am I mistaken, or is it half there?
Oh no, that wasn't his.
That's Beam's?
Yeah, that was
That's not-
Beam's weapon.
Sorry, that's not Beam. That is Bjorn
Yep.
Ironsides.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I was wondering about
No,
that.
Yep.
I'm so sorry.
looks
Bjorn
like-
Ironsides, Utah State.
Yep, that was
Wow.
a quick finish.
That was
Oh
quick.
my
Yep.
gosh.
Well, we have one more fight.
right.
They have 30 minutes to
Yep, the
prepare.
judges just yelled at Robert that he has 30 minutes to rebuild Crippling Depression
Yeah.
before the finals.
You never really know how a fight is going to end up. And going into this match, I really didn't have high hopes. Tape was holding this together more than screws were. As you saw, the front panel came off really quickly. It was just being held in place by Gorilla Tape on the sides. The top and bottom covers were just being held on by Gorilla Tape, and you could see one kind of dangling there at the end. But thankfully, the drive was working and the weapon was working, and just a couple little hits happened and their robot was disabled. I didn't get a chance to end up talking to them about exactly what happened, but they had just gone through so much damage throughout the day. Everyone was getting very tired and just things were breaking. So it was just a really fortunate win for me. And now we go into the finals. We're now at the final fight of the competition, and I was up against the winner of the winner's bracket, which was lots of margin, and I was the winner of the loser's bracket. And in this competition, we did things a little bit differently. Casey decided to go single elimination for the final. Now, normally in a bracket system, you would have to lose twice. Lots of margin had never lost before, and normally I would have to beat them and then beat them again so that they suffer the 2 losses, since I had already lost. But we decided, because of the length of the competition and everything, this was announced ahead of time, that it would be just a single elimination for the last final. So this was the final fight, period. So my strategy for it was just to hope the tape held together. You heard in the end of the last fight, Casey screaming out, Robert, you have 30 minutes. I only had 30 minutes before the last fight, so really the only thing I could do is recharge the battery. I wasn't about to go and try and fix any of these pieces. I just add a little bit more tape, change the batteries out, and threw it back in the arena. So let's see how that went.
All right, and we're going to cut that short because an amazing turnaround time by Crippling Depression. We are ready to go.
That's right. It
We've
looks
got
like
both
they're
bots
all
in the
loaded
big
up.
arena.
Yep. Versus lots of margin.
Yeah, that's
Lots
right.
of margin. All right. Our competitors are ready.
Yeah.
This is it. This is-
There's the team.
3, 2, 1, and go.
Fight.
All right, let's see
we
We got
go.
this.
some contact already.
Yep.
This is going to be a good final if
Yeah.
we get lucky.
Interesting. Crippling Depression pressing into him.
Uh,
But it looks like that.
He's too low.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
No.
No.
Oh, is that
Oh, no way.
it? Knockout?
Come on, guys. Tell me you've got
No.
control.
Nope, he's,
No, we're seeing
I
him.
can see him. He's
Wow.
playing with the controls,
He's
but
trying everything.
I don't see anything happening.
Wow.
Wow.
Rob takes it.
Unbelievable.
Oh,
Look
boy,
at
look
that
at that
glee.
smile.
Crippling Depression takes it.
Yeah, I think the crippling.
So there you have it. It was actually a very short match. The weapon did get up to speed, not really up to full speed or anything like that. Fun fact, this weapon bar, when everything is working fine, this weapon bar has about 30% more kinetic energy than the disc. So this thing actually can hit pretty hard. I don't know how fast we were up to. We were probably up to like 30% speed, but it just rode right up the edge. There is a pretty good nick right here in the blade, and that was pretty much the only damage we ever did with this blade. So it just kind of hit weapon to weapon, and I was told that they had a radio issue. So, it happens. Radios just go out. He said he went back to the pits, turned the robot off, turned it back on, and he had communication again. So something just kind of got jarred or jostled in that little hit, and the radio died, and that was it. So it was not the win that I wanted to have for sure. I think we actually could have had a full match. The geometry was nice for Crippling Depression, riding up that wedge. I think we could have had a good fight, but I guess, after that day that I had, I'll take that win. So not too bad. So yeah, that is the recap for SparkFun AVC 2018. It was a very interesting journey. I know that after we fought Beam, we brought everything back to the pits, and both me and my wife thought we were going home. I started kind of disassembling stuff and starting to fix things, and I saw the look on her face, and she was kind of trying to pull me away from the robot, like, it's okay, it's done. And I think she was pretty confident that we were going home, that we wouldn't get it working again. And I just wanted to kind of try to see if we could get it back together, and sure enough, it did, come back together and was working. But at that time, I just didn't think we were going to go any further. So it was just a lot of luck that we ended up going all the way to the end. And had it been single elimination, I seriously doubt that I would have won the first place. I would have ended up with second place. But that is how Combat Robot goes. You need to be really prepared. You also need to be very lucky, and you also need to, I guess, have a lot of perseverance. You just need to kind of keep plugging through, and if you have something that kind of works, throw it in the arena and see what happens. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to check out the full damage report. I'm sure that's probably going to be a 6-part series with all the damage that happened to this. It's actually not too bad. It's a little crunchy. But I'm going to be doing a full teardown and showing damage of every single last piece. My guess is this is probably going to be pretty much a total loss at this point. All the frame rails are bent. The whole armor is just completely trashed. The weapons are okay. The electronics are seemingly okay, but the drive pods are seriously damaged, and I think the weapon block is even pretty well bent. So I'm going to need to start from scratch on this one. But as always, thanks for watching. Check out my Facebook page for any channel updates, things like that, and we'll see you next time.